Step into a kitchen where every smell tells a story, where every sizzling pan and bubbling pot is more than just food, it's family, survival, tradition, and hope. The 1950s weren't about takeout menus or frozen convenience meals, they were about dinner tables that anchored families every single night. These meals weren't just sustenance, they were rituals, a reflection of America's post-war optimism and the quiet strength of households determined to make every bite count. Before we dive into this journey through forgotten kitchens and lost recipes, take a moment to think of your own family meals. Maybe it's your grandmother's Sunday roast, your mother's casserole, or even the quirky dish your family made that nobody else seemed to understand. Hold on to that memory, because by the end of this story, you might be inspired to bring one of these vintage treasures back into your own kitchen, cooking not just for taste but for connection. The 1950s was an era of contradictions. On one hand, the country was basking in post-war prosperity, suburban homes were rising across America, and modern appliances were making their way into kitchens. On the other, many families still remembered the frugality of the Great Depression and the rations of World War II. The result was a food culture defined by balance, meals that were comforting yet resourceful, filling yet simple, innovative yet rooted in tradition. Every week, families across America gathered at the table without distraction. There were no smartphones, no streaming services, no hurry to run off to the next event. The table was the center of family life, and the meals were both familiar and sacred. Each dish told a story about thrift, creativity, and the determination to turn humble ingredients into something that felt special. And while many of these meals have since slipped into obscurity, they once formed the backbone of daily life. Let's rediscover 25 forgotten meals that every 1950s family knew well. 1. The classic meatloaf. If one dish deserves to be called the crown jewel of 1950s home cooking, it's meatloaf. Made from ground beef stretched with breadcrumbs, eggs, onions, and sometimes oats, it was a masterclass in turning a small amount of meat into a meal big enough for the whole family. The loaf pan became a symbol of thrift and ingenuity. But meatloaf was more than just a budget meal. It was the kind of food that stuck to your ribs, pairing perfectly with mashed potatoes and green beans. Some families glazed theirs with ketchup, others with brown sugar and mustard, and still others with leftover gravy. It was the definition of comfort, a dish that reminded families, in an era of rapid change, that some things were steady and familiar. 2. Tuna noodle casserole. Casseroles defined the 1950s, and none was more iconic than tuna noodle casserole. With canned tuna, cream of mushroom soup, egg noodles, and a crispy topping of potato chips or breadcrumbs, it was cheap, filling, and endlessly adaptable. This dish tells the story of a nation embracing convenience. Canned goods and condensed soups were new, modern, and marketed as lifesavers for busy housewives. A tuna casserole could be prepared quickly, baked while children did homework, and served to a family of 5 without breaking the bank. In many ways, this dish represented both the optimism and the practicality of the decade. 3. Jell-O molds. No food screams 1950s like the shimmering, brightly colored Jell-O mold. Whether sweet or savory, these gelatin creations were the stars of church potlucks, neighborhood block parties, and Sunday dinners. Inside these molds, you could find fruit cocktail, canned pineapple, maraschino cherries, and sometimes even vegetables or shredded meats. Some sound bizarre today, but at the time, Jell-O molds symbolized modernity. They showed off new kitchen gadgets, creativity, and the idea that homemakers could wow guests with something both beautiful and scientifically advanced. In an era fascinated by space travel and technology, even food took on a futuristic shine. 4. Salisbury steak. Salisbury steak was the 1950s answer to steak on a budget. Ground beef patties seasoned and cooked in rich brown gravy became a weekly staple for families who couldn't afford sirloin or ribeye. Served with mashed potatoes, peas, or carrots, it delivered the illusion of luxury at a fraction of the cost. It was also a dish that carried the influence of diners into family kitchens. With its hearty, comforting flavor, Salisbury steak brought a piece of restaurant dining home, making every bite feel special. For many kids, this was their introduction to the idea of steak, a memory that stayed with them long after. 5. Chicken a la king. Elegant yet practical, chicken a la king became a favorite in the 1950s. Chunks of chicken, peppers, and mushrooms floated in a creamy sauce, often served over toast points, biscuits, or rice. It felt upscale, the kind of dish you might imagine at a hotel dining room, but it was accessible enough for suburban kitchens. For homemakers, this dish offered a way to impress company without spending all day at the stove. For families, it meant a break from everyday staples while still relying on affordable ingredients like leftover chicken. 6. Ham and scalloped potatoes. When Sunday rolled around, many families turned to ham paired with bubbling scalloped potatoes. The thinly sliced potatoes layered in cream and baked until golden represented indulgence, while the ham symbolized tradition and togetherness. This meal often stretched into the week, with leftover ham repurposed in sandwiches, omelets, or even fried up for breakfast. It reflected the 1950s ethos of nothing wasted, when every cut of meat and every bit of food was valued. It wasn't just Sunday dinner, it was the foundation of meals to come. 7. Creamed chipped beef on toast. Known to many servicemen as SOS from their military days, creamed chipped beef on toast became a comforting and familiar dish in the 1950s household. Dried beef cooked into a creamy white sauce and poured over toast was simple, inexpensive, and surprisingly filling. For veterans, it was a taste of Army life repurposed for peacetime kitchens. For families, it was quick and reliable, the kind of dish you could prepare when the pantry was running low. Though humble, it carried deep meaning, a bridge between wartime memory and domestic normalcy. Mothers served it as a practical dinner on rushed weeknights, while fathers who had served overseas found comfort in its familiarity. Children, too, came to associate it with warmth and security, even if the dish itself was plain. It symbolized the resilience of a generation that learned to take modest ingredients and turn them into something lasting, nourishing, and meaningful. 8. Spaghetti with meat sauce. Italian-American cuisine entered the mainstream in the 1950s, with spaghetti and meat sauce becoming a family favorite. While authentic recipes were simplified, often using canned tomato paste, ground beef, and dried pasta, the dish still carried an air of excitement. For many American families, this was their first taste of something foreign, a small but significant step toward embracing new flavors. It was affordable, easy to prepare in large batches, and guaranteed to please both kids and adults. Soon enough, it became a weekly ritual. Families often served it with buttered bread or a simple salad, creating the illusion of a full-course meal. Even though it lacked the sophistication of traditional Italian cooking, it represented an openness to culinary experimentation. In many ways, it laid the groundwork for America's growing love affair with international cuisine, proving that even in an age of thrift, meals could also be a cultural adventure. 9. Fried chicken. Before fast food chains made fried chicken an on-the-go option, it was a labor of love prepared at home. Seasoned, dredged, and fried to perfection, homemade fried chicken was often reserved for weekends or special occasions. It wasn't just a meal, it was an event. Families gathered around, each hoping for their favorite piece, from drumsticks to thighs to wings. Served with biscuits, mashed potatoes, and coleslaw, fried chicken symbolized abundance and joy. It was the taste of summer picnics, family reunions, and Sunday dinners that stretched long into the evening. 10. Cabbage rolls. Cabbage rolls, stuffed with ground beef, rice, onions, and simmered in tomato sauce, carried immigrant traditions straight into American kitchens. They were affordable, hearty, and infused with the comforting flavors of slow cooking. In the 1950s, cabbage rolls were not only a practical way to feed a family, but also a way for immigrant families to hold onto their roots while blending into American culture. They brought a sense of heritage to the table, connecting generations through shared flavors. 11. Macaroni and cheese. While macaroni and cheese has never gone away, in the 1950s it reached new heights of popularity. Whether baked from scratch with cheddar and breadcrumbs or made with the convenience of boxed mixes, it was a staple of weekly meals. For children, mac and cheese was pure joy, creamy, cheesy, and comforting. For parents, it was affordable, quick, and almost impossible to mess up. It also represented the beginning of America's love affair with convenience foods, as boxed macaroni and cheese became a pantry staple. 12. Beef stroganoff. Imported and adapted from Russian roots, beef stroganoff became a sophisticated yet accessible meal for the 1950s family. Made with strips of beef in a creamy sauce served over egg noodles, it felt cosmopolitan while remaining easy to prepare. Cookbooks and women's magazines often showcased stroganoff as a way to elevate family dinners, blending practicality with a touch of worldly flair. For suburban households dreaming of sophistication, it was the perfect answer, elegant yet still within reach. These first 12 meals paint a vivid picture of the 1950s kitchen, a space where creativity met practicality, and where every dish was tied to memory, family, and the shifting culture of post-war America. Each meal carried more than flavor, it carried meaning. From meatloaf to macaroni, from casseroles to fried chicken, these were the dishes that filled bellies and hearts. CTA for Part 1. And we're only halfway there. Now, we'll explore 13 more forgotten meals that completed the weekly rotation for families of the 1950s, from savory pies to sweet endings, from regional favorites to national staples. Stay tuned, because the best flavors of nostalgia are still to come. We revisited 12 meals that once defined the heart of American family life in the 1950s. These were the staples of kitchens across the nation, bringing warmth, practicality, and a sense of identity to a country in transition. But those were just the beginning. The full picture of 1950s dining isn't complete until we uncover the rest, the pies, stews, casseroles, and quirky concoctions that together made up the weekly rhythm of family meals. Now, let's continue the journey with the final 13 forgotten treasures of the 1950s dinner table. 13. Pot roast with root vegetables. Few meals embodied Sunday dinners like pot roast. A tough cut of beef simmered slowly with carrots, potatoes, onions, and celery until tender. Pot roast wasn't just about flavor, it was about time. The long cooking hours filled the house with a smell so comforting it almost wrapped around you like a blanket. For many families, pot roast was the centerpiece of weekend gatherings. It wasn't rushed, it was meant to be shared leisurely, often stretching into leftovers that would reappear in sandwiches or soups throughout the week. The dish spoke of patience, of homemakers mastering the art of turning inexpensive cuts into meals that felt rich and hearty. It was more than food, it was an anchor for family rituals. 14. Shepherd's pie. Adapted from British tradition, shepherd's pie made its way into countless 1950s kitchens. Layers of ground beef, or lamb, for those staying closer to the original, peas, carrots, and corn, all topped with mashed potatoes and baked until golden, created a dish that was both practical and deeply satisfying. It was the perfect leftover meal, allowing thrifty homemakers to combine bits of meat and vegetables into something that looked intentional, even elegant. Kids loved the fluffy mashed potatoes on top, while parents appreciated its ability to stretch ingredients. More than anything, shepherd's pie reflected a culture that valued thrift without sacrificing comfort. 15. Turkey tetrazzini. While today turkey tetrazzini is almost forgotten, in the 1950s it was a staple way to use up leftover poultry. Turkey, mushrooms, spaghetti noodles, and creamy sauce baked together into a casserole created a meal that felt indulgent yet frugal. This dish often appeared right after holidays, when families were faced with mountains of leftover turkey. Rather than waste, resourceful homemakers repurposed it into something entirely new. It was an example of 1950s ingenuity, transforming leftovers into meals that felt special and celebratory, proving that even the simplest kitchens could create something memorable. 16. Goulash. American goulash, distinct from its Hungarian cousin, became a beloved weeknight dish in the 1950s. Made from macaroni, ground beef, tomatoes, and onions, it was simple, hearty, and endlessly adaptable. For many families, goulash was the ultimate comfort food. It could feed a crowd, cost very little, and leave everyone satisfied. Its roots in European immigrant cooking reminded families of the old world while adapting to American tastes. In its own way, goulash was a bridge between cultures, showing how food could evolve while still carrying echoes of tradition. Leftovers reheated easily, and children often associated its rich tomato aroma with warmth after school, making it a staple that endured for generations. 17. Chicken and dumplings. Few dishes could rival the cozy warmth of chicken and dumplings. A pot of chicken stew topped with fluffy dumplings was a meal that hugged the soul. In the 1950s, it was both practical and comforting, making use of inexpensive ingredients while delivering maximum satisfaction. This dish also carried strong regional ties, especially in the South, where it had long been a staple. But by the 1950s, it spread across the nation, appearing in magazines and cookbooks as the quintessential comfort food. For many families, chicken and dumplings were more than just dinner, they were a reminder of home, heritage, and the joy of gathering around the table. Its aroma could fill the entire house, drawing everyone together long before the meal was even served. 18. Stuffed bell peppers. Colorful and practical, stuffed bell peppers were a regular feature in 1950s kitchens. Bell peppers, filled with ground beef, rice, onions, and tomato sauce, offered a meal that was as visually appealing as it was filling. they showcased the era's emphasis on presentation. Housewives prided themselves on meals that not only tasted good but also looked impressive when set on the table. Stuffed peppers, with their jewel-like colors and neat portions, delivered both. They also reflected the decade's love of efficiency, a complete meal neatly packed into one edible container. Often topped with melted cheese, they gave families the sense of having something both wholesome and restaurant-worthy right at home. 19. Baked ziti. Italian-American influence continued to spread in the 1950s, and baked ziti was another dish that became a weekly staple. Pasta layered with tomato sauce, cheese, and sometimes sausage or ground beef, baked until bubbling, created a meal that was hearty, filling, and deeply satisfying. Baked ziti reflected the cultural melting pot of post-war America. It allowed families to experience the richness of Italian flavors in a dish that was easy to make and adaptable to local tastes. More than that, it symbolized the way immigrant traditions became mainstream, woven into the very fabric of American food culture. 20. Liver and onions. While it may not be popular today, liver and onions was a standard part of the 1950s dinner rotation. Rich in nutrients and affordable compared to other cuts of meat, liver was considered a wholesome, strengthening food, especially for children. Cooked with caramelized onions to balance its strong flavor, liver represented the era's practical approach to nutrition. Families valued thrift and believed in making use of every part of the animal. Though many kids dreaded it, liver and onions was a rite of passage, one of those meals you didn't necessarily love, but you remembered. Parents often insisted it built strength, and in households guided by Depression-era values, wasting such a resource was unthinkable. 21. Deviled eggs and cold cuts. Not every meal in the 1950s was hot and heavy. Cold suppers were a common solution during warm months or busy days. Deviled eggs, paired with cold cuts, cheese slices, and bread, made for a simple but satisfying dinner. These meals reflected a shift toward flexibility in family dining. They also showcased the popularity of picnics, backyard gatherings, and casual entertaining. Deviled eggs in particular became iconic, representing both tradition and creativity, with each family perfecting their own seasoning. Together, these foods offered a lighter but still memorable break from heavier weekly fare. It was also one of the first serve-yourself spreads, where everyone could build their own plate, a sign of more casual dining to come. 22. Pork chops with applesauce. Thanks to television personality and food enthusiast Peter Brady, pork chops with applesauce became an iconic pairing, but it was already a staple in 1950s households. Juicy pork chops seared or baked, paired with sweet applesauce, created a contrast of flavors that delighted families. It was also a reflection of regional traditions, especially in the Midwest and South, where pork was plentiful and apples grew in abundance. Together, they created a dish that was balanced, comforting, and distinctly American. Families loved it because it was both simple and special, the kind of meal that could elevate an ordinary weeknight. For children, the sweetness of applesauce softened the meal's appeal, while adults appreciated the touch of old-world tradition hidden in such a humble pairing. 23. Corned beef hash. Corned beef hash was another dish born of thrift and ingenuity. Made from leftover corned beef, potatoes, and onions, fried together until crispy, it was equally at home on the breakfast table or served as dinner. In the 1950s, it represented the ideal of making do with what you had. Nothing was wasted, and everything was turned into something tasty. Hash was also versatile, families could stretch it with eggs, vegetables, or gravy. It was proof that creativity could turn scraps into meals that filled stomachs and warmed hearts. Many families even associated its sizzling aroma on the skillet with comfort, proving that even the simplest meals could carry deep emotional weight. 24. Baked beans with franks. Simple, filling, and beloved by kids, baked beans with franks, or beanie weenies, was a staple of casual 1950s dinners. Canned baked beans simmered with sliced hot dogs made for a quick and inexpensive meal that still managed to feel like a treat. This dish captured the era's growing fascination with convenience. Canned goods and processed meats were modern marvels, advertised as ways to save time and money. For children, it was fun; for parents, it was easy. Together, it was a reminder that not every meal needed to be elaborate to be meaningful. Families often served it alongside buttered bread or cornbread, making it stretch further, and it became a go-to for family nights when simplicity was the goal. 25. Homemade pie for dessert. Number 1950s meal felt complete without dessert, and homemade pies reigned supreme. Apple, cherry, lemon meringue, and chocolate cream pies appeared weekly on dinner tables. Pies weren't just about sweetness, they were about tradition, hospitality, and pride. Baking a pie from scratch was a skill every homemaker valued, and it became a symbol of care and devotion. Families gathered around the table, finishing their meals with a slice of something warm, flaky, and unforgettable. In many ways, the pie was the exclamation point at the end of a family dinner, a sweet reminder that food was about more than sustenance. A well-made pie also served as a calling card for mothers and grandmothers, passed down through family recipes that kept heritage alive in every bite. Together, these 25 meals tell the story of an America both practical and optimistic, rooted in tradition yet eager to embrace modern convenience. They reflect a culture where food was more than calories, it was connection. Dinner tables of the 1950s weren't about rushing or multitasking, they were about pausing, gathering, and sharing life over food that carried meaning. Many of these meals have faded into obscurity, replaced by fast food, delivery apps, and global flavors. But their legacy lives on, in memories, in family cookbooks, and in the occasional kitchen that dares to bring them back. The 1950s dinner table reminds us of a truth that never changes: food is history, food is family, and food is love. So here's the challenge: pick one of these forgotten meals and bring it back to life in your kitchen this week. Whether it's meatloaf, chicken and dumplings, or even a shimmering Jell-O mold, let it be more than just dinner. Let it be a bridge to the past, a celebration of family, and a reminder that the best meals are the ones that bring people together.